Ben Faulkner thought the lake cabin would be his retreat from the noise. After 10 years as a city engineer in Denver and months spent dealing with hospital bills for his late father, peace was no longer a luxury. It was a necessity. The property, set at the quiet edge of meadow shores, tucked beneath tall pines that swayed with a rhythm only nature understood. The cabin wasn't glamorous, but it was his. Weathered wood, creaky porch, cracked window panes, nothing a few weekends and a toolbox couldn't fix. He arrived on a Friday evening with a truckload of supplies and a head full of memories. The air smelled like cedar and moss, and for a moment, as the sun dipped below the lake and bathed everything in gold, Ben felt like life was finally beginning to quiet down. That moment lasted 12 hours. At 9:02 a.m. the next morning, someone knocked on the screen door. Not a hello, not a welcome to the neighborhood, just a sharp, rhythmic rapping that screamed of authority. Ben opened the door to find a woman in business casual standing on his steps like she owned them. Karen Delacroix, HOA President, she introduced herself without warmth. Her assistant, a younger man named Jeff, stood just behind her, clipboard in hand, phone already recording. Mr. Faulkner, she began, holding up a form. You are in violation of updated architectural code standards as outlined by Meadow Shores Homeowners Association. Section 12, Visual Compliance. Non-standard structures visible from the community lakefront must be removed or brought into alignment with approved design guidelines. Ben stared blankly. What does that even mean? Karen didn't blink. You've got 1 hour to begin demolition. Ben laughed once, unsure if this was some weird lake house prank. I just got here last night. She didn't move. I've started the clock. From her watch, she tapped a button. A loud beep sounded. You've got 59 minutes now, she added. The structure violates community visual continuity. If it's not addressed, fines start at $1,000 per hour, escalating daily. Jeff adjusted the phone angle, recording every second. Ben stepped outside and looked over his cabin, the same one his grandfather built by hand in 1979. No neighbors were even within view. He looked back at Karen. You're serious, Karen smiled. HOA business is always serious. She turned and walked away, heels tapping down the gravel path like a judge's gavel. Ben closed the door behind him and muttered, what the hell just happened? He didn't grab a hammer. He grabbed his laptop and his phone. Something didn't feel right. He called the county office, asked about the zoning. They confirmed what Karen said. A clause added last year gave the HOA power to enforce shoreline design rules. It had passed by vote, with no objections on record. He sat on the floor and dug through a cardboard box marked Grandpa's files. At the very bottom, beneath an old fishing license and a map of the lake, he found the deed. It was old, printed on heavy paper, the kind that smelled like dust and pine sap. As he read through the fine print, something caught his eye. A boundary line, clearly marked, much larger than the footprint of the cabin itself. His grandfather hadn't just owned the lot, he owned the shoreline, a wide stretch of land along the lake that included the HOA's dock, their picnic tables, even the gravel parking area marked residents only. Ben flipped the paper over, a handwritten note from his grandfather, in smudged ink. Don't let them build without paying. Lease ends if they don't renew by year 30. Ben counted the years. The lease expired last month. His heart pounded as pieces began snapping together. The HOA's dock wasn't theirs. Neither was the parking lot or the lake trail. They'd been using his land, renting it under an old lease they clearly forgot about. Karen had marched onto his property to demand he destroy a cabin he legally owned, while her entire HOA setup was now trespassing on ground they no longer had rights to. He grabbed a notebook and started scribbling numbers. If they were still using the land, they owed him rent, a lot of it, and now, legally, they had no lease, and if they had no lease, they had no power. Ben stood up and looked out the cabin window. Karen was on the dock, clipboard in hand, barking at someone over the phone. Her confidence was bulletproof. But she didn't know the wall she was about to run into. He didn't need to demolish anything. Not yet. He needed to make one phone call. The moment Ben hung up with the county office, he called Chelsea Mackenzie. She was the closest thing he had to a lawyer friend. They'd gone to high school together, lost touch, then reconnected after his father's funeral. She ran a small land use and property rights firm to towns over and had a reputation for making code enforcers regret their jobs. He scanned a PDF of the deed and lease documents and sent them over. 10 minutes later, Chelsea called him back, not with questions, but with a low whistle. "Ben," she said, "this isn't a backyard. This is a nuclear button." He leaned on the cabin windowsill, watching Karen bark orders into her phone. Down by the dock. Chelsea continued. "That lease agreement is tied to your grandfather's original property deal with the county. It expired 30 years from the date it was signed, which, according to this, was exactly 1 month ago. If the HOA didn't renew or renegotiate in writing, then every inch of that land is now back under your private control." Ben rubbed the back of his neck. "And what happens if I decide to enforce that?" Chelsea didn't hesitate. "Then, the HOA is trespassing every bench, every plank of that dock, even their precious barbecue pit. If they keep using it without your consent, you can hit them with a retroactive rent demand or a cease and desist." Ben glanced outside. To HOA members, older guys in board polos, were setting up folding chairs near the lake. They didn't even look his way. "Chelsea," he said, "what if I don't want them to stop using it right away?" There was a pause on the line, then a smile in her voice, "Then start charging them for the privilege." By the afternoon, Ben had drafted a formal lease renewal notice. He titled it Land Use Fee Adjustment, effective immediately. It outlined new monthly charges: $5,000 for dock access, $3,000 for parking, $2,000 for picnic use. He didn't pull those numbers from thin air. He based them on commercial lakefront rental rates from nearby resorts. And just to twist the knife politely, he added a clause: failure to respond within 7 business days would result in revocation of access. He printed 5 copies, laminated them, and staked one to each entrance of the dock, the trailhead, and the parking lot. The next morning, Karen was already waiting outside his cabin before he'd poured his coffee. She stood at the edge of the porch like she was expecting to be obeyed. "Is this some kind of joke?" Ben stepped out, coffee mug in hand. "Not unless you think land ownership is funny." Karen snatched the laminated sign from the dock gate, waving it like a surrender flag. "This isn't valid. You can't just decide to charge rent." "I'm not deciding," he said calmly. "Your lease expired. You're still using my land. That's trespassing." "Karen, I'm offering you a legal option to stay." Karen's voice dropped, sharp and quiet. "This entire community has been using that dock for 20 years. Exactly. You've gotten 20 years of underpriced rent. I'm just updating the market rate." Her jaw tightened. "You can't enforce this. The HOA will sue." Ben took a sip. "Then I'll countersue for 3 decades of back rent. Want me to calculate the interest?" Karen looked over his shoulder at the cabin, her tone shifting. "You're bluffing. You're still in violation. That building doesn't meet the new code." "Maybe," Ben said. "But now that I'm your landlord, I figure you'll be too. Busy negotiating a new lease to worry about my porch steps." Karen's eyes narrowed. Then she turned and marched off, Jeff trailing behind her like a dog who knew the leash was slipping. But the sign stayed up. Over the next 2 days, the neighborhood chatter exploded. Ben overheard murmurs on the trail, a dad trying to explain to his kids why they couldn't fish from the dock, a group of teens standing at the fence, laughing at the new private property pit to access signs. The HOA board posted a notice disputing Ben's claim, calling it fraudulent. But nobody could prove it wrong, because nobody had read the lease, except Ben, and the real fun hadn't even started yet. Karen had never been challenged like this, not in her neighborhood, not in her role, not on her watch. For the past 4 years, The board obeyed her without question. She issued fines like parking tickets and rewrote bylaws without blinking. Most residents were too busy or too indifferent to push back. But Ben Faulkner wasn't most residents. He wasn't scared. And worse, he knew the law. On Monday morning, HOA members gathered for a scheduled meeting at the community hall. Normally, meetings were quiet affairs. Half the room showed up for snacks. The rest came to gossip. But this time, it was packed. Folding chairs lined the walls. A murmur ran through the crowd. Some of curiosity, some of concern. Ben sat quietly in the back, arms crossed, a single folder in his lap. Karen took the stage, flanked by her two usual allies, Don Weaver, the HOA treasurer, and Margot Fields, the secretary. Her hair was tightly pulled back, lips pressed in a line. She tried to start with the budget, but no one was listening. The air was heavy with unspoken questions. Then it started. "I have a question," said an older man near the front. "Is it true the HOA forgot to renew a land lease for the dock?" Karen stiffened. "That matter is under legal review and doesn't concern this meeting's agenda." Another hand went up, then another. Someone in the back raised a phone, recording. A woman with short gray hair stood and spoke louder. "I talked to the county myself," she said. "They said Mr. Faulkner's claim checks out. How did the board miss this? My family's been paying dues for access to land that isn't even ours." Karen's eyes darted to Dawn and Margot. Margot fumbled with a pen. Dawn stared straight ahead. Ben waited, silent. He knew exactly what was happening. Karen had ruled through fear and formality. But now the crowd was turning. Not just curious, but angry. And fear never holds up well in daylight. Karen tried to redirect. "The lease issue is being handled privately. But what's more pressing is the non-compliant structure Mr. Faulkner is refusing to tear down." That, she was interrupted again. "That structure's on his land," a voice snapped. "Shouldn't we be focused on fixing our mistake first?" The room rippled with whispers. Karen's control slipped further. She tried to signal Jeff, but he wasn't even filming today. He looked pale, uncomfortable, like he wished he hadn't come. Ben finally stood. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't wave papers. He just spoke clearly. "I'm not here to cause a war. But for 30 years, your amenities have sat on land that my grandfather leased to this HOA. That lease expired, and the HOA didn't bother to renew it. You didn't pay attention to the fine print. I did." He held up the folder. "And here are survey documents, the original lease, and a letter from my attorney confirming ownership. I've already filed a property boundary report with the county. You can verify it yourselves." No one spoke. Karen looked ready to combust. Ben continued. "I've offered a lease renewal. Triple the old rate, yes. But considering how long you've been underpaying for the privilege, I think that's more than fair." A woman near the back stood. "If we don't accept the lease, then legally your HOA can't use my dock, my trail, or my parking lot. Not even the picnic tables. I'll be forced to revoke access. And if the board continues to deny it, I'll start charging daily penalties." Karen snapped. "That's extortion." Ben didn't blink. "No, Karen. That's rent." Silence. Don cleared his throat. "We may need to review our legal exposure before moving forward." Someone chuckled in the back. Karen shot him a look. But the damage was done. Her allies were flaking. Her control was cracking. And Ben wasn't even sweating. He left the meeting with no raised voices, no conflict, just quiet steps, and the confidence of a man who understood how leverage worked. Outside, Chelsea texted him, "Nice job, you just put a dent in their power structure." He smiled. But he wasn't done. Not yet. Because while Karen scrambled to fix things, Ben had just discovered something else buried in the HOA's documents. And it was bigger than the lease. The storm that followed the HOA meeting didn't rage out loud. It brewed in the quiet. Karen didn't show her face for 2 full days. No emails, no new fines, not even a passive-aggressive memo on the bulletin board. For a woman who used to send violation notices about crooked lawn chairs, Her silence was deafening. Ben, on the other hand, wasn't sitting still. Chelsea had asked a simple question that stuck with him. Why the urgency now? Why had Karen stormed onto his property so aggressively, demanding demolition? Why the timer, the video, the fake authority? It wasn't just about aesthetics. That much was clear. So Ben did what any good engineer would do. He started digging through the data. Chelsea reached out to a paralegal friend who pulled public horror records from the past 5 years. Meeting minutes, financial summaries, member communications, most were boring. Budget approvals, landscaping discussions, holiday banners. But then one document caught Ben's eye, a series of emails dated 3 months ago between Karen and someone. Listed only as M. Delacroix Pine, Horizon Development. He narrowed his eyes. Delacroix, same last name. The emails have been uploaded accidentally, buried as part of a PDF attachment from an earlier board report. He wouldn't have seen them if he hadn't opened every single file. The subject line, Lakefront, Redevelopment Feasibility. Phase 1. Ben's heart rate spiked. Inside, Karen was discussing a potential acquisition of shoreline land parcels, specifically the unutilized lot near Doxy, which the email identified as currently held by a single independent property owner with no recent development history. That owner was Ben. Karen had marked his cabin lot as a target, not just for cleanup, but for redevelopment. She described him as isolated and unlikely to litigate. There was even a note about using structural code enforcement to encourage voluntary removal. Ben sat back, stunned. This wasn't incompetence. It was a coordinated effort. Karen hadn't been enforcing horror rules. She'd been clearing the way for her nephew's development firm to buy up lakefront property at a discount. The timing of the new HOA code revisions, the sudden urgency, the 1-hour ultimatum, it all made sense now. Karen had planned to push him out with fines and fear, then hand the law over for pennies, build luxury cabins, flip the whole shoreline. Ben didn't feel angry. Not yet. He felt focused. He forwarded the emails to Chelsea. Her reply was short. We're not just playing defense anymore. Ben printed the emails. 5 clean copies, each one sealed in an envelope. The next morning, he walked the community trail just before sunrise, placing one on the doorsteps of the 5 most senior HOA members, not Karen's inner circle, but the long-timers, people who had real roots in the neighborhood, people who remembered when the horror was about maintenance, not power. By noon, his phone rang. It was Ron Bentley, a retired judge who'd lived at Meadow Shores since the early 90s. Son, he said, you've caused quite the ruckus. Ben stayed calm. You saw the emails. Ron grunted. I did. I also called a friend of mine at the county courthouse. If what I'm reading is accurate, then what Karen's doing violates both your property rights and about 3 different horror bylaws. She could be in real trouble. Ben said nothing. Ron continued. There's a board vote coming up in 2 weeks. I'd suggest you stay visible. Let people see you, talk to you, because I think you're going to have more allies than you realize. Ben didn't smile. He nodded once, even though Ron couldn't see it. Later that evening, as he stood by the cabin steps watching the water ripple across the dock, a white SUV crept slowly past his driveway. Karen sat inside, staring at him from behind the wheel. No clipboard this time, no words, just a long, cold look. She knew. Ben raised a hand and waved, slow and steady. She didn't wave back. He turned and walked inside. The trap she'd set had snapped, just not the way she planned. And now, the clock was ticking for her. The first real crack came from inside. 2 days after Ben's silent envelope drop, a notice appeared on the community board beside the lake trail. It wasn't from Karen. It was signed by Don Weaver, treasurer of the horror, longtime loyalist, and one of the few who had stood at Karen's side during the confrontation. The notice read, Emergency Board Session called. Independent legal review in progress. Transparency demanded. All residents encouraged to attend. Ben read it twice. Chelsea called him 10 minutes later. "That's a white flag," she said, Dunn's peeling away. "He doesn't want to go down with her." Ben wasn't surprised. The emails had been too clean. The implication too obvious. Karen hadn't just broken protocol, she'd betrayed her own team. And Dawn, like most self-preserving bureaucrats, wasn't going to defend a sinking ship. That night, the HOAS group chat, usually filled with lawn service tips and last pet alerts, exploded. Screenshots of the redevelopment emails circulated. Faster than wildfire, people began asking questions in public threads. Did Karen try to sell the dock? Were we ever consulted about this? Has she been planning to demolish our homes too? The silence from Karen was louder than a siren. By the time the emergency session rolled around, half the neighborhood was already in mutiny mode. But Ben didn't gloat. He knew the fire had started. But fires could burn anyone if they weren't careful. Instead, he focused on pressure. Financial pressure. That morning, he walked down to the parking lot by the lake. It was the same lot Karen had installed security cameras over 2 summers ago. Cameras that, ironically, were mounted to a light pole rooted in soil Ben now legally owned. He posted a bright, weatherproof sign at the entrance, "Private property, monthly lease required for use. HOA unpaid, access will be revoked in 72 hours. Below it, in small print, was a number for lease inquiries. By noon. His voicemail was full. Residents didn't blame him, not anymore. They were angry, not at the signs, but at Karen. She had promised them lake access, trails, barbecue nights under string lights. Now they were facing lockouts, legal confusion, and the sudden realization that their HOA hadn't been transparent in years. Ben made it worse by making it better. He emailed the board with a counteroffer. He proposed a new lease agreement, this time broken down by amenity, available not only to the HOA, but also to individual homeowners. Want access to the dock? Pay a personal monthly fee. Want to fish? Ben would issue permits. Want to host a picnic? He'd rent out space by the R. No board needed. No Karen required. People jumped on it. In less than 24 hours. Ben had signed 10 personal use leases and collected enough in fees to cover a month's cabin renovation costs. He didn't even advertise. Word just spread, and with every new agreement, the HOAS group weakened. Then the real blow landed. A local reporter, someone Chelsea knew from a previous zoning case, reached out to Ben for a comment. She had picked up on the horror drama through Facebook posts. At first, Ben declined. But when the reporter confirmed she'd already interviewed the board members off record and requested a copy of the say documents, Ben agreed. He met her by the dock. She filmed the interview with the lake behind him. He kept it simple, calm, no anger, just facts. This land was leased by my grandfather to the HOA for 30 years. They let it expire. I offered them a fair renewal. They refused. So I gave residents the choice to work with me directly. The clip went viral in town. By sunset, 3 more board members had resigned. Karen still hadn't shown her face, but Ben knew she was still watching. He could feel it, that twisted brand of control, now cornered, now desperate. What would she do next? Because power like Karen's doesn't fade quietly. It snaps. And somewhere in her silence, he could already hear it cracking. It had been 12 days since Karen Delacroix disappeared from public view. 12 days of crumbling control, board resignations, and lease agreements flowing through Ben's inbox like clockwork. In that time, the HOAS authority had faded from iron rule to quiet suggestion. Ben thought maybe, just maybe, she'd retreat, let the board implode, walk away quietly, leave the neighborhood to lick its wounds. He underestimated her. Karen didn't believe in losing. It was a Friday afternoon, the sky smothered with storm clouds. When she reappeared, Ben had just returned from town with fresh lumber and supplies. As he stepped out of the truck, he saw her car already parked illegally on the gravel trail behind his cabin. She wasn't alone. A uniformed deputy stood beside her, hands on, his belt, brow furrowed like he'd been dragged into something ridiculous. Karen, by contrast, was smiling, She pointed directly at the cabin porch. "There it is," she said, loudly. "Non-compliant structure, visual obstruction, unsafe decking. That building is condemned under our revised HOA code. He's been issued written orders and refused." The deputy looked at Ben. "Is this true?" Ben, calm as ever, set his bag down and pulled out a manila envelope from the truck's dashboard. "This," he said, "is a copy of the county's registered deed showing full ownership of the land and structure. That," he pointed toward Karen, "is an HOA president who no longer holds any jurisdiction over this property." Karen interrupted. "He's falsifying boundary claims. I have legal documents." "The board," Ben cut her off. "The board, half of them quit. The other half signed my lease." The deputy took the envelope and flipped through the pages. After a long pause, he looked at Karen. "Mom, unless there's a court order or active injunction, I don't see any authority here to trespass, let alone to enforce demolition." Karen's smile faltered. Her eyes darted to the deputy, then to Ben. "He's defrauding this community," she hissed. "We've spent decades building this neighborhood, and you nearly sold it off for profit." Ben shot back. "Your nephew's firm, Pine Horizon, you had no intention of preserving this place. You just wanted to flip it." The deputy blinked. "Is that true?" Karen didn't answer. Ben leaned closer. "You're not here to enforce the rules, Karen. You're here because your plan fell apart. And now you're panicking." Her face twitched. The deputy took a small step back. Then it happened. Karen pushed past them both, stormed onto the porch, and grabbed one of Ben's signs off the cabin wall. "This isn't valid," she shouted. "You can't just block residents from the lake. You can't rewrite the neighborhood. You're trespassing." Ben said, "Not moving. You're on private property." Karen wheeled around, furious. "You want to play lawyer? Fine. Let's see how the county likes hearing you're operating a rental business without proper zoning." Ben didn't flinch. "They already know. I called them 2 weeks ago. I've filed every lease. I've paid every required fee. You're out of moves." The deputy finally stepped forward. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to leave the property now." Karen froze. Her breath came fast, shallow. She looked like a string pulled to tight, vibrating, desperate not to snap. But then she did. She hurled the wooden sign to the ground, shattering it in two, and stormed back to her car. No apology, no words, just a screech of tires as she drove off, fishtailing the gravel. The deputy handed Ben back his folder. "She'll probably file a complaint. You might want to prepare for a legal round." "I've been preparing since she started." "The timer," Ben said quietly. That night, the neighborhood group chat lit up again. Someone had caught the entire incident on their porch cam. Karen screaming, the deputy's warning, the broken sign. It circulated fast. Then someone else posted an older clip, footage from 2 weeks earlier. Karen on the HOA dock, holding a clipboard, gesturing with authority. Ben was in the background, watching. And now the community was watching to. The next HOA meeting was only 4 days away. But the neighborhood had already started whispering one word: recall. The next HOA meeting wasn't held at the usual community hall. It was moved, hastily, to the lakeside pavilion, the only space big enough to hold the crowd that showed up. Folding chairs overflowed onto the grass, with neighbors standing, shoulder to shoulder, some recording with phones, others holding copies of the lease Ben had distributed. Even the local news station sent a cameraman. The energy was electric. Everyone expected one thing: Karen's resignation. But Karen wasn't in attendance. Instead, a man in a slate gray blazer stepped onto the stage, flanked by 2 legal aides and a confident grin. Ben didn't recognize him. Neither did most of the neighborhood. But Chelsea, who stood quietly at the edge of the crowd, narrowed her eyes and leaned in. The man tapped the mic. "Good evening, my name is Marcus Delacroix, CEO of Pine Horizon Development. I'm here representing Meadow Shores HOA through power of attorney granted by President Karen Delacroix." Murmurs shot through the crowd. Ben stood up. Marcus continued, Let me be clear, my end has stepped aside. Temporarily, while this transition occurs. But the board is not dissolving. In fact, a realignment is already underway, and Pine Horizon will now serve as the HOA's management contractor, effective immediately. Gasps broke out. Someone shouted, "This isn't a development firm, it's a hostile takeover." Marcus smiled like he expected the pushback. "We're not here to take anything, we're here to restore order. The chaos caused by Mr. Faulkner's land claims has jeopardized community trust, access, and property values. As such, the HOA has initiated proceedings to challenge his lease interpretation and file for eminent domain enforcement." Ben's pulse stopped for half a second. Chelsea hissed, "They're going federal." Ben stepped forward, speaking loud. "Enough for the mic to pick up. Eminent domain? This isn't government property. This is private land, held under deed since 1979. Marcus didn't flinch. "And you're offering rental access to residents for profit, which opens a window under public utility zoning. If the court agrees you're providing infrastructure and income, the HOA can petition the county to reclassify your land as essential to the community." Chelsea whispered, "It's a stretch, but not impossible." Marcus went on. "Furthermore, Mr. Faulkner has acted as a landlord without proper HOA approval or licensing. That opens additional lawsuits." The crowd turned restless, angry, confused. Ben stepped up to the stage. "This isn't about zoning. This is about your failed plan to develop my land. Karen tried to evict me. When that didn't work, she brought you in. You're using legal intimidation to bulldoze the truth." Marcus's face darkened for a moment. Just a flash. Then, "Truth. Let's talk about truth." He reached into his folder and pulled out a document. 3 years ago, your grandfather's land lease lapsed, but county clerks never removed the HOA's operational rights. That clerical error gave us continued access, which we can now argue was grandfathered into community planning. Ben took a step back. That part he hadn't seen. Chelsea whispered, "We need to get the original lease into court. If that error is used against us, they can stall this for months, maybe longer." The crowd looked between them, unsure who to believe. Marcus was sharp, polished. Ben was real, grounded. But Marcus had paperwork. He had presence. He had poison disguised as professionalism. Then something happened no one expected. Ron Bentley, the retired judge, walked up to the mic. "Enough," he said, voice gravelly. "I've lived here longer than anyone, and I've never seen this HOA operate with such arrogance. What you're doing," he said, looking directly at Marcus, "isn't management. It's manipulation. We didn't elect you. We elected neighbors, not developers in suits." Applause. A ripple of nods. Ron held up a petition. "This is a community recall. I've collected signatures from 72% of residents. We're not just removing Karen, we're dissolving the board. Effective tonight." Marcus's smirk faded. Chelsea leaned to Ben. "That flips everything." But Ben didn't smile. Not yet. Because the next day, he found something in his grandfather's records. A clause nobody had mentioned. A clause about mineral rights and the hidden value buried beneath the lake bed. And just like that, Ben realized something. This wasn't about the cabin. It never was. It started with a water-stained envelope at the bottom of Ben's father's storage trunk. Ben hadn't even meant to find it. He was searching for a wiring diagram from the original cabin blueprints when he noticed the envelope, sealed with brittle wax and labeled only with a date, June 1978. Inside was a signed agreement, a private memorandum between Ben's grandfather and a company long since dissolved. The letterhead read, Delcor Minerals, LLC. Ben's brow furrowed. The company name rang no bell until he spotted the signature at the bottom, Martin Delacroix, Karen's late husband. Attached was a geological survey, an old one, printed on acetate paper, showing mineral test results. Around the lake bed, the analysis wasn't detailed, but the keywords jumped off the page: shale, gas presence, low yield reserve. And then the one that made his stomach twist: future exploitation potential, probable. It was a long-shot energy deal, buried, forgotten, except someone hadn't forgotten. Ben stared at the map for a long time. This wasn't about zoning. It wasn't about code violations. It wasn't even about lakefront views or Karen's obsession with matching shutters. This was about what lay beneath the lake. And Karen, through her family's development company, had known it was still there. The expired lease had been a threat to her plans, not because of aesthetics, but because Ben's property gave him exclusive access rights to the WATERLINE. If someone were to extract the resources, Ben would own the only viable permit zone. Chelsea confirmed it the next morning. Delcor was absorbed into Pine Horizon 15 years ago, she said. That land deal your grandfather made, it stalled when the EPA stepped in. But with new deregulations over the last few years, it's back in play, quietly. And Karen, she's been maneuvering to reclaim your shoreline ever since. Ben sat on the cabin steps, staring out at the water. It looked so calm, so ordinary. And yet, beneath its surface was the reason for everything. That evening, Ben made one final move. He didn't file a lawsuit. He filed a public disclosure request with the county records office, requesting a geological impact study on Meadow Shores Lake, along with any commercial drilling interest applications submitted in the past 2 years. He CC'd the local news station. And the State Land Commission. Then, he published the mineral rights document in full to the community board, the HOA chat, and the local HOA reform group's website. No commentary, no threats. Just facts. The explosion came 24 hours later. Emails, phone calls, press requests, neighbors demanding answers. Karen didn't respond. Marcus did, with a cease and desist letter, claiming Ben had released incomplete and confidential historical documents. Chelsea laughed when she read it. Confidential, she said. The document was notarized, recorded, and never sealed. He just kicked his own hornet nest. By the end of the week, the county had opened a formal inquiry into Pine Horizon's holdings. The mineral exploration license, submitted quietly 6 months earlier, was now front-page news. Every homeowner on the lake wanted to know how long they'd been living over an energy deal none of them had voted on. The HOA board was officially dissolved. Karen resigned completely. Marcus vanished. And Ben, he stayed. He repaired the porch, added solar panels, painted the shutters forest green. The land was his again, not just by deed, but by truth. Neighbors who once viewed him with suspicion now stopped to shake his hand, or drop off baked goods, or simply say thank you. One elderly couple asked if he'd consider running a new, resident-led HOA. Ben laughed. I think I've had enough board meetings for one lifetime. One foggy morning, as mist rose over the water, Ben sat at the edge of the dock, his dock, and watched the sunrise. He thought of his grandfather, who had quietly protected what mattered, of his father, who never spoke much, but always saw through people, and of Karen, who tried to erase a legacy to fuel her ambition. In the end, she lost not because Ben fought back, but because she never imagined he'd dig deep enough to find the truth. And when you build a war on lies, all it takes is one man with a deed and a shovel.